In this video, I'm going to be talking about trade setup. In trade setup, it's all about preparing all the information necessary so that you can enter your trade into your trading platform provider. Now, I'm here on search scans, and I've brought the list of scans into view. I'm going to be choosing the scan that was done on the New York Stock Exchange daily 3 trends long, the 22nd of January 2015. I'm going to click the view button, and we're going to have a look at the list of stocks that was chosen in that scan under this strategy 3 trends long. I'm going to tick across all these boxes, so I'm going to save time and only get what should be considered the best of the best stocks. Now, this is still a list that's quite long, and I'm going to focus on a particular trade today. The stock that I'm going to have a look at is WPC, which is WP Carey & Co. Not because it's the best stock in my opinion, but because it has some interesting areas that are good for this presentation. So clicking the view button, and that same list that we were looking at has been brought to you now in chart view, and it's highlighted to you the stock that we're going to be looking at, WP Carey & Co. Now, to have a look at the setup, we can see that there's a potential reward to risk ratio of nearly 3 to 1, 2.97, and we can see here that there's a blue dashed line taking us back. So I'm going to trace back that blue line. I'm going to go back in history, and I can see the reason why it's drawn that line is because there's a previous long-term peak here, and in order to be considered something of value on a reward to risk basis, the system has actually detected that long-term peak and drawn the reward to a point which is 1% below the high of that long-term peak. So I'll just drill in now, and I'll bring on the peak and trough lines. So what we can see is the current dominant peak has been drawn for you by a horizontal line, and the red dot showing you that that's where the previous dominant peak is. It's showing the last candle, which looks very close to broken, or maybe not quite broken. Now I'm going to show to you an indicator which will say, has it broken the last dominant peak? Up here is dominant breakout. And when I click on that, you can see that this candle on the end has highlighted itself in blue, which tells me that its price is greater than or has pierced the last dominant peak. Now we want to make sure that the stock, as it has regressed, gone down, and as it's made its way back up towards that previous dominant peak, that it has tested to the system's satisfaction that that dominant peak and the market have been trying to surpass it. So I'm going to allow drawing a horizontal line at peak trough option. Click the apply button. I'm going to remove these horizontal lines that have been drawn for you by just right clicking on the chart. I'm just going to focus on this peak here and the most recent peak, which is approaching or has approached the previous dominant peak. I'm going to click there. Now you can see the price difference is 40 cents and minus 0.55%. So roughly minus 0.5% towards that dominant peak the market has gone up to. It's had a pullback, produce a trough, and now it looks as if it has actually broken quite convincingly, if we look at that last candle, that dominant peak. And the chances are that this stock will continue to rise. Nothing is sure in the market, but it's the best that we can determine at this point in time. I'm now going to accept this stock and progress it through to a setup. So here's the option here, accept, and go to next stock. Click the accept button. It tells me that it's now updated to status awaiting setup. Okay, brings me to the next stock, but I'm not interested in going through this list now. For the purpose of this video, I'm now going to go into my list of stocks that are in that status called awaiting setup. Clicking up here, awaiting setup, and I'll just bring that chart up. Okay, so what I'm going to do is discuss again this section of the form which relates to the workflow that's necessary at each status, in this case awaiting setup, and what we can do in this status. I'm going to drill in a little bit closer, a 2-month view. I'm going to put the peak and trough lines on, and what is important now that we're actually looking at a setup is what is the amount of risk that we're going to take. Now, the system by default has found 2 points of demand by the 2 dashed orange lines, and it's brought us down to the 2 ATR boundary here, showing points of demand between 2 and 4 ATRs. Now I can just see that just under the 2 ATR boundary there's another point of demand there. I'm going to click the risk button one more time. It's going to present the line down to that point of demand, 0.5% below that trough. Now, I'm happy with that as being a suitable amount of risk to take on this trade. I'm now going to look at what options I have to me, and the option here, copy to trade setup. So it will take this default setup here, progress it towards another tab, identify risk reward. A new tab has appeared called trade setup. Those numbers have now been transferred into this tab here. Now this tab is broken up into 3 sections. There's the entry price, the risk stop, and the reward target, as shown to you. There is an area here related to reward, and there is the actual number of shares and risk in dollar figures, capital, that we're going to use for this trade. So back now onto the first section. $73.08 is the entry price, 2 pips above this last candle. The risk stop is at $71 exactly. The reward target is $78.54, which is 1% below what we saw was that previous long-term peak. Now, I can make adjustments to any of these numbers, and I'm going to also look now at this number here, $71.10. And I'm going to bring it down because I don't like the way it's rounded to exactly 10 cents. I'll bring it down to 7 cents, $71.07, just a little bit below what I want to hide behind there. As I did that, you notice we have modified the amount of risk to the reward, and the reward to risk ratio has also changed slightly as well, to that same number of cents in the ratio. Now, when I'm happy with the entry price, the risk stop, and the reward target, I see the system has automatically given to me a list of scale outs. Scale outs are those places which are in direct relationship to the amount of risk that I've taken, what is 1 to 1, what is 2 to 1, and up here at a fixed level of reward, what that is as well. So up here, 1 to 1 will take me to $75.09, the first light blue line here. Scale out to $77.10, this line here, automatically calculated for me. The last one, $78.54, actually is the same as the reward target that was shown to me on the identify risk reward. So there I have 3 potential places at which I could take profit on this trade. I have also some tick boxes here to say, do I want to keep or not keep that as a graphical line where I would like to take profit on this trade. So if I untick, you'll see that what was drawn as the 1 to 1 has now been removed from the chart. Again, the 2 to 1 removed from the chart, and what I'm left with is the fixed scale out. Now, I've said the word fixed scale out. I've been a bit premature there. If we go back to the reward target, which is the place at which this reward has been drawn to, I have an option here to set that reward target as a fixed scale out. Now, the other ones that were shown to you, the 1 to 1 and the 2 to 1, they're artificial reward targets that just are related to exactly the distance of this risk and marrying the 1 to 1 relationship, the 2 to 1 relationship of those. But this one here, the reward target, is more important because it suggests that if the market actually goes to that level, it will begin to test that previous long-term peak, and we should consider that that be our final reward, because the market will tend to fluctuate at that point. And so we can actually set that as a fixed target. Now, by setting that as a fixed target, scale out 3 has been disabled, and the name here has changed from keep to fixed, saying that we'd like to lock in this as an important place on which to take profit. Now, these scale outs here, the 1 to 1 and 2 to 1, they've been calculated for you exactly. Now, it presents the number, and those numbers themselves can be modified. The idea of the trade setup is that we work from left to right. So importantly, we've identified what our risk stop is, because without that, we don't have any ratios at which to say, well, where are potential targets based on what risk we're prepared to take on this trade. Now, in this case, $75.09 has been shown to us as exactly 1 to 1 with our risk and a reward target. I'm going to modify that. $75, I'm going to bring that a little bit under $75. I'm going to bring that to $74.93. Now, as I did that, notice that the ratio of the risk and the reward at this scale out has changed from what was exactly 1 to 1 to just 0.92 to 1. So a little bit under 1 to 1. But in this situation, I'm going to choose that as an appropriate scale out for taking reward. And I'm happy that I haven't quite met the 1 to 1, but I'm going to play it a bit safe. And I'm going to keep that. The 2 to 1, I'm not interested for the purposes of this demonstration. I'm going to untick that. So I'm left with 2 potential targets for taking profit in this trade. One is slightly under 1 to 1, 0.92, and the other one is going to be 1% behind the previous long-term peak. So I've shown to you now how we're working from left to right. The last area to consider is what risk value we're going to place. How much capital are we going to use when we are considering this amount of risk? Now, if I want to risk $1,000, which is shown to you by default, it means that if the stock goes from the entry price down to this risk stop, I'm going to lose $1,000 on this trade. I'm prepared to do that. It tells me the number of shares that I need to buy based on this entry price in order to risk that $1,000. Now, this is also an area in the form which you can modify. If I say, well, look, now $1,000 is not in accordance with my capital, I don't have that much capital, I'm going to risk $500. Now, what's happened is it's told me the number of shares that I should purchase are 249 shares. What you see underneath is just a multiplication of the entry price, $73.08, the number of shares to give me the total amount of capital that needs to be spent, $18,196.92. Now, depending on whether I'm buying the shares outright, I would need that much capital, or if I'm CFD trading, of course, it only relates to a percent of that. I'm now going to save this setup. I believe I've got all of the necessary information. I've organised it into the amount of risk and why that is a good place to take my risk value down to. I've organised the amount of reward that is potential in this trade, and I've also given you a way of showing where potential risk reward targets would be. Now, you yourself may choose different variations of this. You may be looking at the major indices. In this case, I've shown you the S&P 500. Here are other major indices that you can do your relative strength comparison against. And you may decide that you have a different strategy about where you'd like to take your potential reward targets. For the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to leave it at this. I'm now going to click on the Save Setup, but I also have the option where I can start afresh. I can undo all the changes, take me back to the Identify Risk Reward, and I can copy to Trade Setup and do the same thing again. I can also cancel this setup altogether, which just means remove it from the system, out of the status awaiting setup, and no more to be done. I'm going to click the Save Setup. Setup created for WP Carey & Co. now in awaiting submission status. So what is awaiting submission? Well, we now have all the information in order to go to our trading platform and enter the details into the trading platform, as well as keep the log of how we've set up the trade on this system. Now, the stock was removed from this list. There may have been more stocks that were in awaiting setup status. In this case, there was just the one. And I'm told there's no more stocks in the list. I was told that the stock was now going to be placed in an awaiting submission status. So up here, I have that next status, awaiting submission. I click on that. I bring up the form, and here it is now. WPC Carey & Co. in an awaiting submission status. Here on this form, in this section, is the workflow that is necessary to progress this trade from the awaiting submission status to an awaiting trigger status. So the first tab is now the trade setup. We're no longer shown the Identify Risk Reward because we've gone past that step. So we're shown the trade setup that we determined in the previous stage, and here it all is here. I'm going to go to my trading platform, enter in the relevant information, and I'm going to look over here and see what is available for me to progress this trade. Next step, go to trade dates, undo the changes, or cancel the setup. Go to trade dates. Now, what's important also when trading equity stocks is that we also consider any ex-dividend dates or reporting dates. Now, these are not given to you in this system. You'll have to go and find those yourself. They're not mandatory. I've said they're optional. But what is important is that on these dates, there can be more volatility in the stock. There may be drops with large gaps, or vice versa, rises with large gaps, in which the market has taken some information, particularly when it's reporting, to say, well, look, this is a fantastic stock, or no, according to the report, it is not a stock that I'd be interested in keeping any further. So these dates can be entered into the system. We just check the tick box. By default, it's today's date, but that needs to be modified. The reporting date, the same. I'm going to leave these for now, and I'm going to continue and look at the next step, go to trade submitted. Trade submitted is the final tab in its status, where we actually get to say that we have in fact confirmed the trade has been submitted with trading platform provider. Now, if I'm trading CFDs, I may have an account with IG Markets, so I put in whatever text I'd like to put in there about who my trading platform provider is. I also have the option of saying, well, no, it's just a demonstration trade only. I'm paper trading. I'm using this application as a way of becoming comfortable with how it does its strategies. So I'm going to make it just a demo trade. So I tick that box there. The submitted period relates to the period on the chart at which we've entered it into the system. Now, we've got shown to us here that first target, the second reward target, our risk stop, and the dotted vertical line showing us the candle for the period of the 22nd of January that we're going to enter it into our trading platform. So there it is there. I'm going to confirm that I'm going to enter it into my trading platform, IG Markets. It's not a demonstration trade, and I'm going to click Save the Trade. Message comes up saying the trade has been submitted for WP Carey & Co. Now in the awaiting trigger status. So awaiting trigger is that the market needs to meet my entry price, at which point in time it will be triggered in. So we're now going to shuffle this trade from the awaiting submission status to an awaiting trigger status. The stock is removed from the list. There may be other stocks in this list, but that was the only one for the purposes of this demonstration. Close that. Have a look at the status awaiting trigger. And there is the trade there in an awaiting trigger status. Again, we have a workflow area about what is applicable to consider when the trade is in an awaiting trigger status. I'm still at liberty to modify my setup. Again, working from left to right. Areas to consider are the risk stop, the reward target, which can be modified if I wish. Now, I still have trade dates. I have a new tab here in this workflow, trade pending. Just going to go across trade dates, trade pending, and what we see here is a confirmation when the trade has triggered about how many shares have been triggered in at what price. Now this relates to what we had on the trade setup. So the entry price, $73.08, 249 shares. That information shown to you there. Modify shares and or entry price. Just taking us back to trade setup. So you can see that that has been disabled for you because the price of the stock has yet not been triggered. We've only just entered it in, so we have to wait for a trading day at least to decide whether we are going to trigger in. The options shown to you over here, trade is now active, go to next trade. Disabled for the same reason, we haven't yet met our entry price of $73.08. Not yet triggered, go to next trade. Again, if we had a long list, we'd be able to just say, okay, we've reviewed it, not yet triggered, go to next trade. Or we could in fact, after several days, should the market go against us and our entry price have not been triggered, we can cancel out of the trade altogether and no further action is required. So that's all for this video. The idea was to show you a progression from selecting a scan trade, taking it through a setup, submitting it onto our trading platform, and now having it waiting to be triggered in.